But Mollie Hemmingway is co-editor-in-chief of The Federalist, a must-read every day. She's also the journalism fellow at Hillsdale College and my guest this morning. Good morning, Mollie. How are you?
Great. It's great to be here with you.
Thank you for joining me. I had Chris Christie on earlier, and I want to follow up on a couple of things that he had to talk about. First, redistricting has not gone the way Democrats hoped it would because even New York's highest court said the plan they produced stunk and they threw it out. Are you surprised by how well Republicans have done in the courts of New York?
Certainly surprised by how it's gone in New York, since the courts there are pretty biased against Republicans. I actually don't think Republicans did that great overall on redistricting. It was something that they were likely to have some losses, but they had a lot of decisions not go their way. It's a tough battle. You have to fight for it each time. And state courts, as you know, can be pretty partisan and work to preserve partisan power, and it's important because it's just one of the most important things for having free and fair elections and having the democratic aspects of our republic work is to have good districts that are fair and represent the people.
Illinois and California are big D wins. Florida and Ohio, if the map holds up in Ohio, and I think it is, are good R wins. All told, I think the Republicans, according to National Journal, have about a 2.5 to 3 seat pickup, and that's before the wave, Mollie. So I am happy. I'm confident.
And it's good to remember that Republicans had an unnaturally good redistricting the previous decade, and so there was going to be some correction for that anyway.
Now, Mollie, you're one of the fairest people I know on the center right, and I don't know what your opinions are about Republican National Committee debates, but I think Ronna McDaniel and David Bossie have done a good thing by blowing off the Presidential Debate Commission, but they will run between 12 and 15 debates themselves in the primaries. The rule set will matter a lot. What are your initial thoughts on what a fair set of rules look like for those debates? If we have a number of candidates, as I predict in the Washington Post, we're going to have a number of candidates.
I don't know. I actually think the most important thing is, as you know, finally standing strong against this ridiculous thing that we've had for decades, where you have moderators who are so partisan and openly biased that they don't even recognize their own bias, and they treat Republican candidates like second-class citizens. I'm fine with large numbers of candidates. I actually think that it's great. I think a lot of people didn't like it in 2015 and 2016, but it was a good way for that party, the Republican Party, to work through some issues it had to work through. You saw it in 2020 with Democrats, that by having a large number of candidates, they also could kind of have some open battles over the direction of the party, and you get it all cleaned up by the end of the primary season, and then you move on. So I don't have strong views at this point. It's a little hard to tell without knowing how many candidates you're going to have in play. But the most important thing is to keep left-wing propaganda media types away from Republican debates, and also away from the general election debates as well. It's not fair to treat Republican voters like second-class citizens, which is what we've seen in our debates, for decades.
I am pretty certain that Reince Priebus began the transition to what you're talking about, and I think Ronna McDaniel will finish it, and that the networks will not control. They may broadcast, they may carry, but they may not control the content, that the RNC is going to pick the moderators, and the moderators will work it out. And I don't think we have any shortage of Matt Continentis and Mollie Hemingways and Guy Bensons and Mary Catherine Hams. And I could go on, Jason, I could go on and on about the number of people who would actually represent the electorate that is picking the nominee. Do you agree with me on that?
Well, and it's not even representing, it's raising issues that are of concern to those people.
Right.
And sometimes having a hostile moderator is a good way to get good answers. The problem is when the hostile moderator is only hostile against one side. So, you could even have an argument that you want to put right-leaning moderators against Democratic candidates or not. But, think about how it feels as a Republican to watch these debates. They're bringing up issues of interest to the left. They're asking gotcha questions framed in a way to help the left. And so conservative voters who are trying to figure out what's going on or which candidate to vote for, the questions they want asked are never asked. And that's the most important thing. These debates serve the people and should help us be able to pick the right candidate. We can't do that when the questions we care about are never asked.
And I think that's best accomplished, at least in the Republican primaries, by center-right commentators, not by so-called independent journalists of stature in the mainstream media. Second question,
and again,
go ahead.
They're not independent.
They're not.
Wing. They show that every day, and that's one of the problems is we treat these people like they're moderate or moderators when they're not. They're political activists, and they've demonstrated that for a long time, but in recent years, it's gotten so much worse, it's untenable.
It is, I go back to the CNN debate prep room where I got handed me a book that they quickly took away because I wasn't supposed to see it. I was the interloper that had Ted Cruz's Lies. That's what the book was titled, Ted Cruz's Lies. It kind of told you what they were about. They wanted to exploit what they thought were misstatements by the current Texas senator. Mollie, I also believe in randomized seating charts, so that if you've got 10 candidates, you can put them on a stage, but you randomize where they stand. You don't do it by height, and you don't do it by polling. Polling last night was wrong again. They had David McCormick at 21%. He's at 31%. They had him in third place in the last 4 polls. He's tied for first in a race that won't be decided for days, maybe weeks. They are never right. They are never right, Mollie.
It's particularly a problem with primaries. So
Yes.
Polling is wrong all the time. Primary polling is actually very difficult to do. It's difficult to get right. You're dealing with people who can kind of make last-minute, the voters themselves make last-minute changes in their decisions, and so you have a very good point there that it should not be set by polling. I don't know about completely randomized. You can have so many candidates that you don't want to just mix the more legitimate candidates with people who are just running for a particular one issue they want to focus on, or that don't have the support either financially or with the people. So there should be probably I haven't thought about it enough, but there should be some constraints on.
I hope you think about it. My theory is you ought to have a group of wise people who actually know the party and say, I'm sorry, you're not viable. Prove us wrong. But Michelle Bachmann should not have been on the stage in 2012. And Alan Keyes certainly shouldn't have been on the stage with John McCain and George W. Bush in the year 2000. And I know Alan. I knew him. I've known him since 1974. It was absurd. But because we have this stupid ollie in free rule, and we don't have grown-ups in the room to say, sorry, you're not in, that allows for marginal candidates. They eat up time, space, and opportunity. Mollie, talk to me about the party. I wrote for the Washington Post today. We have Ultra MAGA, MAGA Light, and everybody else. What do you think of my 3 divisions?
Well, I do think that people sometimes make a mistake in building it all around, building all of what they're saying about what's happening in the party around Trump. The Republican Party has gone through a transformation in the last 5 to 6 years. I think most everyone actually recognizes the need to update policy positions. You look in Pennsylvania, it is really interesting. You have the Trump-endorsed candidate who a lot of conservatives did not find to be conservative enough. You have the ultra MAGA candidate of Kathy Barnett. Those two together, I think they're probably got a majority of the votes. You've got Dave McCormick, who represents more of the establishment. But I'm also not sure there's like a tremendously huge distinction between these 3 groups. It's more like streams of thought within the party that predominate or don't. I do worry that the party doesn't understand that the voters are ready to change how the Republican Party has done business. They're looking for much more to be done when the Republican Party takes power. They want to have a clear agenda about the things that concern them, whether it's about the control big tech has over our discourse or taking on China. They don't want to just have rhetoric. They want to have actual action.
Now, Mollie, you're not old enough. You wouldn't remember the 1984 There's a Bear in the Woods ad. It only aired once, but it got a lot of play as a legendary ad. Some people, there's a bear in the woods. Some people say it's not dangerous. I think the Republican Party is united around there's a dragon in the air. And I think that 2024 will be the one thing that everyone agrees about is that Joe Biden has hollowed out the military and we are not in a position to deter China. What do you think about that?
Well, I think these were some of the debates that we started seeing in the 2015 and 2016 debate stage on how the Republican Party takes on foreign policy. I think that division is actually very serious and significant right now. You had the early stage of the war in Ukraine. leading to just massive popular support for involvement there as people start thinking through what it means to be involved in a long-term war there, including what that means about how well positioned we are to take on China. I think you will see much more vibrant debate going forward and less of this sort of just reflexive acceptance of whatever the generals on TV are saying needs to be done in Ukraine. But it does seem that many people you're seeing, again, in these different streams, everyone seems to recognize China is a threat. This is so different than what we thought as a party or as a nation in 2015 and 2016, but people finally seem to have awakened to the challenge there, the economic and national security challenges there. And so I do hope you'll see much better ideas and more specific ideas about how to take on China. Biden hasn't been a complete disaster on that in that he kept some of our tariffs and whatnot that are there, but he has just been asleep at the wheel for the threat there. And, we keep hearing like there's going to be some new big policy statement released for Biden versus, about how to take on China. And we're still waiting and waiting.
It's the weakest administration since Carter, and it may be weaker than Carter. Mollie, I want to close with what I think is the slam dunk issue. You and Carrie Severino wrote a book about it. Everyone has to pledge to be at least as good as Donald Trump on court appointments. Do you think that's a given? People have to know the issue. They have to bring in the Federalist Society. They have to bring in Kerry's Judicial Crisis Network. They have to agree to be led by the pros. Do you agree on that?
Well, I think, having written the book about how many Republican presidents had failed to achieve the conservative judicial project, it's important that people be clear. And I think one of the things Trump did that was so important, and 25% of his voters voted for him on this issue, was say precisely what the list was that he would nominate from, instead of saying, I'll nominate a justice like Thomas or like Alito. He gave actual names so people could look at that. I wish Democrats would do that as well, but it's definitely a game changer in the Republican Party, and it needs to be the same going forward.
Mollie Hemmingway, always good to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining me this morning.